Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The silver light shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you listening on the Life Online Radio Network, we welcome you in. For those of you listening on our YouTube channel, we welcome you in. Special thanks to our sponsor, Affinity Writing and Editing Services. That's at Affinity WES, both on Twitter and on Facebook. Affinity Writing and Editing Services are there to help you with any writing-related concern. Speaking of writing, we've been seeing a lot of writing in the media lately. The TV, the internet, YouTube, whatever you might consume as your particular media, and it's all about fear. Take, for example, this election cycle. It's been about fear from the very beginning. Those on the right say the left is out to sabotage the world and take the world over in a totalitarian regime. Those on the left say those on the right are out to take over the world and hold everybody in a totalitarian regime. The end result of this is fear. And indeed, the strategy that is currently being employed is designed to prolong the fear. In previous years, previous elections, the announcement of who won has been done almost instantaneously to various results. There hasn't really been a clean election in quite some time. But they've done something rather ingenious here, and they've ramped up the fear dial to 11. Because not only did they capture the fear on the night of the election, remember, on the night of the United States presidential election, people were boarding up their shops, scared that people were going to riot and loot them. People were going out into the country for the same exact fear. Fear was everywhere. Fear that the current president will remain in office. Fear that a new guy might take over. Nothing but fear pouring everywhere. So by not announcing who the winner is until we get a final result, yes, in 2020, with all of our computers and all of our technology, somehow they think they can get a different result by physically counting the ballots, despite the fact the ones that came in advance were already counted and the late ones are already in. This process that actually does work in real life is going to result probably in a couple months' worth of legal battles. Because that way they can keep you in fear. Oh no, the old guy might be coming back. Oh no, the new guy might make it in. Whatever your preference may be. In case I haven't made it abundantly clear on this show, I am an equal opportunity disliker of all political parties and all political systems. I don't care whether it's the United Kingdom, Italy, Canada, the United States, Australia. I think all of them could use substantial improvements. They're all pretty much a product of 19th century politics, which were great for the 19th century, but we're in the 21st century. We don't really have any political parties that represent us, and it's been that way for the longest time. The party's leaders represent the interests of who they hold to. And it's not you as a voter. They care about your vote once every 4 years. Other than that, they care about the interest groups who are giving them money. And that's who the politicians are afraid of. Now, in the current president's state, he could probably fund the election out of his own pocket. But he's a sly old fox. I brought up this expression too on other shows, other people's money. So long as he can use other people's money to run his election, he's not going to reach into his pocket. He'd rather use your money and your tax dollars. The same is true of the other guy. He is just as invested in his political backers and sponsors and people who donate to his campaign and the party and all the work they can do to really be worried about your individual concerns. Remember, your vote counts as 1/40 millionth or 1/360 millionth, depending on the population of your Canada, 1/360 millionth of their time. Plus, both of them have interests in other fields. They're both rich old white guys in the old system that represent kind of the worst of what we had. Outside of this show, I have compared this election to selecting the shiniest of two turds. And I stick to that analogy. Neither one is any better than the other. They're two slightly different flavors of the same thing. No significant domestic policy is going to change. No significant foreign policy is going to change. As an example of this, in the United Nations, there was a resolution just passed where 50 nations signed on to outlaw nuclear weapons. Now, while I think this is a very laudable goal, and indeed we should all fear nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are one way we can remove ourselves from the earth with damage that will last for thousands of years. Something else that anybody that grew up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, which I believe is my rough target demographic, can relate to, because we were all told about the nuclear scare every single day. To our fortune, and believe me, other forces were at work than fortune, it went away. It hasn't officially gone away, and they keep trying to keep us in fear because despite the fact the Cold War ended, Russians still send bombers over the United Kingdom and over the United States. China still occasionally reminds us that they're a big threat. North Korea likes to launch occasional missiles over Japan because nations like to keep each other in fear. Elections, though, are at their core designed to encourage fear. This is a modern phenomenon. Back in the old days, people would talk about they were electing somebody because of what they stood for. I believe Winston Churchill said it best. He stands for election, he sits in Parliament, and he is expected to lie. I love Winston Churchill as a grain of a lot of truths. As a person, he might have been many things, but what he wrote was undeniably spot on as far as politics goes. Elections, as a cycle, are kind of silly. This one, I'm predicting, is going to drag on a lot longer than usual because of the threats of lawsuits. We've been through this before, but the difference is the current president has a pretty good track record in court. He can usually hold out long enough to get the other person to give in. This time won't be the same. And elections themselves are based around fear tactics. Politicians no longer promise what they will do, they promise what they will stand against. Back in the olden days, the standard line for any politician was law and order. Everybody wanted law and order because we want to be able to go out in the streets, to be able to go about our business and know that if I have $1 in my pocket, I can go to the dollar store and buy something, tax excluded. But that dollar will still be respected. The merchant behind the place won't try to steal my money. Thugs in the street won't try to steal my money. I can depend on that. And law and order is essential to a functioning society. The past year or so, from the Antifa riots to QAnon to the riots going on around the mask, have shown us that fear is alive and better than ever. Fear is why they tell you to go to elections. I keep hearing, this comes from a former campaign manager, I keep hearing the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard in my life. If you don't vote, you don't have a right to an opinion. I challenge this with every fiber of my being. For the record, I do vote. I also, on occasion, decline my ballot. The difference between spoiling your ballot and declining it is a declined ballot must be counted, whereas a spoiled one is thrown out. So you go up to the poller, you receive your ballot, you hand it back without touching it all, saying you've declined your ballot. And therefore, you have officially registered a protest vote. If they get enough declined ballots, they will not be able to hold an election. I think the number has to be 50% declined or something. It's not a tactic everybody knows, but it's one that is legitimate and works. We just haven't learned to use it. And as a people, we really should. Collective bargaining, collective reasoning, collective activity has not gone away. We've simply abandoned it. In the 1970s and 1980s, unions had power. Professional organizations had power. People standing together have power. Right now, the rioters on the streets have power through the power of fear. And by telling you, if you don't vote, you don't have an opinion, is a very subtle power. It's stripping you of your constitutional and charter rights. Under the charter, under the Constitution, and under every principle we hold dear, you have the right to free speech and free mind. I can say one thing, although there's a few things I can't say, but there's anything I can think. Fortunately, I don't have really bizarre thoughts aside from writing my novels, hosting a show, and a few other things, but I'm pretty mainstream, aside from the fact I don't like the political parties. But by telling me if I don't vote, my opinion doesn't count, invalidates me as a person. That's a fear tactic. Say, oh, you didn't have time to go to the polls. You were in jail at the time of the polls. You were in a hospital at the time of the polls. You were 17 years old when the polls counted. You were 8 years old when the polls counted. Your opinion doesn't matter. And that is so wrong, my friends. Let me assure you, your opinion matters. You have the right to not vote if you do not want to. I suggest you do, but at the same token, if you're like me, I vote for a candidate. I get to know the candidates in my area very well. And I can pick out right away, this guy's good, this girl's good, this person, don't know anything about them, and they're hiding in the background. Therefore, I'm not going to pay attention to them. That sounds more cruel than it is, but I actually pay attention to the politicians in my area. One of my local politicians I am happy to vote for. Every single time the ballot comes up, there's a check mark for me. At another level, I never know who to vote for. Because, like I said, I don't like any of the political parties. And the individuals that they select are not the ones that I'm interested in. So that leaves me constantly, every few years, having to defend my position that me not voting does not invalidate my rights as a human being, as codified under the Charter and the Constitution. But you get these people coming right back at you saying, oh, if you don't vote, you don't have the right to complain. I have the right to complain about anything I want, and so do you. You didn't elect the weather. It happened. You can complain about it. You didn't set the defense budget. It happened. You can complain about it. You weren't involved in the backdoor meetings when they agreed to allow a new red food dye through that in 20 years they'll find out causes cancer. You didn't vote for that, but you're still allowed to have an opinion on it. And this is, again, having actually worked a campaign trail, this fear that is trying to be worked into the election of people snarkily saying, you don't have a right if you didn't vote. That is completely wrong. Your rights are still in place, whether you're a month old, 17 years old, or 99 years old, or older. Hopefully I got some 100-year-olds listening to this one day, in which case, congratulations. Telling somebody them not voting says they can't have a political opinion invalidates everything outside the mainstream parties. Once again, the main parties are basically Coke and Pepsi. One's a little sweeter, and it depends on your opinion. Most people have an opinion, although it can be swayed by various things. Some people honestly don't care. Whoever has the sale gets their money that way. Same thing with politicians. Most people don't really have an opinion until the latest one comes along and promises whatever. And that's their liking, so they vote. There's a lot of one-issue politicians and a lot of one-issue voters. And that's a legitimate thing to have concern about one particular item. In our campaign, we work closely with a landlord-tenant situation, and The things I found out that people live through are disgusting. I've been fortunate in my life that where I've chosen to live, whether it was an apartment or house or whatever, I've been fortunate wherever I've gone that things were in relatively good shape and were maintained in proper order. What a lot of tenants are going through, aside from, like I said, individual landowners that are very good and gracious with their time and make sure their property is up to date, I saw a rotted fire hose. Yes, you know the fire equipment station where they have that long hose and the tap to turn it on just in case the worst that happens? Well, the fire hose actually had fungus growing on it. And the fire hose was old enough to be asbestos. I ask you, what kind of fungus grows on asbestos? That stuff is killer. Literally, it kills people, it kills animals, it kills things. It was designed to be resistant to fire, but it is a killer, and it's basically glass. Nothing eats glass. But in my two eyes, I witnessed not just that, but a whole bunch of other things that have been left completely disregarded. One thing, if you're living in an apartment building, that you may not notice are the carpets. This is something you should fear, but don't know about. Not what's going on a million miles away and people that don't concern themselves about you, but something you should fear into your own home, apartment building, whatever it might be, is the underpadding of the carpet. This is something most people don't think of. But the underpadding of the carpet, it actually breaks down into a fine dust over time. After about 10 years, it breaks down. So that fine dust becomes an irritant. And if you vacuum it, it just gets blown up in the air because even a HEPA filter won't start it, leading it to settle other places, causing allergies, causing asthma, causing all sorts of problems. And that's assuming that whatever the base of the carpet, you know what I'm talking about. There's the carpet itself, the fabric on top, and the padding underneath it, the rubbery stuff. Well, whatever they made the rubbery stuff out of might be good for you, or more likely, it's not going to be good for you. And I could tell in this building that layer of rubber padding, if it had been there in the first place, had long ago disintegrated. Just for an experiment, it might be worth going to your landlord and checking it. Do it together. Do it non-confrontationally. This is another thing that we should really address in the show this week. Confrontation. Everybody is always on edge, not just in 2020. I could have said the same thing from 2019 back to 1970. And pretty much everybody is on edge for a number of reasons. Our lives seem to keep getting more fast-paced. There's a little bit of a debate over that, but at the same token, I think the basic ideas hold true. We're always going to the most of our ability, or at least what we think is the most of our ability. And we're afraid of running behind. We're afraid of disappointing our bosses. We're afraid of not meeting a deadline. Afraid. Fear. That's why so many people snap. Not the guy going snap with a gun, but I'm saying people get very snippy with each other. Had a guy that was in line behind me, and he was trying to go through. And it was a narrow place, and I just didn't particularly like the situation. I had 2 items left to be rung through, and I was ready to go. And I said, "Can you please wait for just a moment, and I'll move out of your way." Thought I was being polite. Thought I was being a good guy. Well, this guy told everybody what a jerk I was, and he didn't use that term. You know what? My channel's for over 18. He was telling everybody, this guy's an asshole. He won't let me over there to see my wife, blah, blah, blah. Now, his wife was bagging up a cart full of groceries. And I had like 3 things. So, and while we were walking out, he kept chirping at me, and I was like, relax. I'm out of here. We're supposed to have 2 meters spacing, and it's not a very big area. I'm not a particularly big guy, but at the same token, it would be intimate for us to move past each other. Let me put it that way. I can appreciate why the servers and, or sorry, not the servers, the cashiers have the screens up now, because I've seen customers go absolutely bananas at a cashier for virtually nothing. I can understand if they overcharge you $1,000 or something, and yeah, you're going to go back a little bit tense. But the fear is in all of us. The cashier is afraid to say the cashier is afraid to say she made a mistake, because that's the cashier's job on the line, whether it be a male, female, or indeterminate gender. The customer is afraid because they're losing money. And sadly, too many people prioritize money above everything else. And I do mean everything. So when you get a group of people that are all together, who are all afraid of everything and everybody, you wind up with riots. You wind up with confrontation. You wind up with people prejudging each other because they're afraid of what they've been through in the past. There's nasty people of every description you might look for. There's also very pleasant people. Unfortunately, the 10% rule comes into place. 10% of the people in the world are wonderful. They are fantastic to be around. They're full of positive energy. They would take out their wallet and use it to stop a bullet coming at you if they could. Then there's those 10% of people who are just rotten, awful, horrible human beings. Sadly, the way our consciousness is developed, we put more weight on remembering the awful than we do on remembering the good. This is actually a very valid survival mechanism. By remembering places that are unpleasant, by remembering people who are unpleasant, you are using your brain, which is your biggest asset over every other creature on the planet. You're using that brain to say, I'm not going with that person again. He's a jerk. She's a jerk. Whoever it is did this and made me feel bad, stole my pocket change, whatever they did, slashed my tires, who cares? But you remember that bad situation. Some people are redeemable because they make stupid mistakes one time. You meet them the next time, they're fine. 80% of people are in that wishy-washy range. Some are good, some are bad, but you can live without them without a strong reaction. Politicians in elections try to take advantage of this. Like I said, you're more prone to remembering the bad people in your life than the good people in your life. And that's why politicians want to evoke that same reaction out of you. They want to be in your head. They want fear to take over, because fear makes you drive them to either this guy is a bad guy and I need to vote for the opposite, or to push them out entirely and say, okay, I don't care about this guy, but this other guy I don't like, so it's a fear response. It's based on fear. And they've been getting very good at it. From attack ads, which fortunately I haven't seen any of the past couple elections because I choose not to consume mass media. Cutting the cord is a really good thing, my friends. If nothing else, it saves me from having to put up with Christmas music from November till January. Unless I so choose to listen to it. That is probably not a fear-based reaction, but just the fact I've heard every single one of those tunes 50,000 times. And I don't even know if I'm exaggerating there. But cutting the cord lets me get away from 2-3 days worth of political exposure and around major events that I don't care about, such as the Oscars. Who won the Oscar in 1972 for Best Film? Don't care. I don't even know if the Oscars are about film, to be honest with you. This is a tradition of events that I like to call rich people amuse themselves. And rich people do it all the time, whether it's going to banquets, whether it's going to meet and greets. That's what rich people do. Donald Trump doesn't hang out with his friends. He goes to an event. The Queen doesn't come around for sandwiches. She has a whole entourage to come with her to look after her every need. Elon Musk, subject of one of our shows. He doesn't just go to the ice cream store. He's got a whole retinue with him, including quite probably security. One of my favorite stories about Barack Obama is on one of his first days in the White House, he saw an ice cream truck and took his kids over there, not even thinking for a second that as the leader of the free world at that time, there might cause some concern. Here he was, just a dad, socializing with people, saying, hey, getting my two kids ice cream, and the Secret Service were freaked out, beside themselves, because he made a human decision. That's right, the Secret Service lives in fear. Which is a bit justifiable in their mistake, because if I make a mistake on the radio, I can always apologize for it later. If I make a mistake in writing, either I can correct it or my good friends at Affinity Writing and Editing Services can help me. If I make a mistake to a friend, I can just apologize. The Secret Service, if they make a mistake, people die. So fear is justified, just not in everyday situations. Most people in workplace are being intimidated, not overtly, but covertly. You might get along with your boss, you might not. Hopefully you do, but at the same token, you know they are the boss. And when you get that note, can I see you in my office? The phone call, can you come in early? We need to discuss something. Your heart does skip a beat. Because you're human. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same token, when your boss says, I need this by this time, I need you to step up and pay attention, I need you to put away the phone, you react out of fear. Fear of losing your job, fear of discipline, fear of whatever it might be that you're doing. Some lucky people in this world go to a job that they love. Whether it be they're an actuary, whether they're a nurse, whatever it is, and they deal with their problems, they soar through them as though they're an eagle in the clouds. And again, those are those top 10% of people that I tell you about. If you have one as a friend, and I do, hold them close for the rest of your life. It's never bad to have an angel. And bosses don't intend to call you out. They don't want to call you out. As a former boss myself, I can tell you, we don't want to have the confrontation. We would rather everything function perfectly and we could get on with other duties. But if we have to look over our employees, we have to do it. A good example of this would be calling in sick. However sick you are, however horrible you are, you still get that little bit of fear when you call up and say, boss, can't come in today. And it's ridiculous. Most of the times when people call in sick, it's for a legitimate reason. And I know this because as a boss, I used to document it. I didn't document the reason. I just documented the fact. And you'd see very obvious patterns. Some people would call in once a year. Okay, no problem. The Monday after Super Bowl, no matter how sick I was, I would drag myself into work just to hear the excuses on the phone. Well, I can't come in because, and it was always a laugh. My favorite is I had one employee who, for 2 years, called in about every 2 weeks, telling me his girlfriend was going into labor. Never raised my voice, never did anything, I just documented it and handed it to my superior. I wasn't going to fire the man, they were perfectly happy with him. All I just did was document it. Like I said, it was always the same excuse. His girlfriend was going into labor. Every 2 weeks over a period of 2 years. I was tempted to say something, but again, I was afraid. The phone calls were being monitored, and if I said something stupid, now I would be in the same room as this gentleman, having to explain what I said. I'm not immune to fear. Quite the opposite. I'm afraid of quite a lot. But they're rational fears, at least I tell myself. I'm not afraid of snakes. At the same token, I understand some people are. Not afraid of spiders. At the same token, I understand some people are. I am slightly afraid of big dogs, which might surprise you, considering I'm a big fellow myself, but I'm not fond of big dogs. I like them. I think they're nice. I just want them far away. If I'm sitting in the park and someone's walking by with a dog, they look fantastic, have a great time. But if the dog comes up and starts acting friendly, I'd rather not be around this particular dog. Smaller dogs like Shelties, stuff like that, I don't have a problem. But the big dogs, when I was younger, we had relatives who had 2 big dogs. And me only being a little tyke at the time, under 10 years old, these dogs were not trained at all. So you were given your dinner from the table, and as soon as you sat down with it, the dog would get right in your face trying to get your dinner away from you. Yes, it was minor, but I was a young child at the time, and I remember this incident, and ever since then, I just don't trust big dogs. I can learn to trust individual big dogs that I've met repeatedly and gotten a rapport with, but as a general rule, I would not like a Malamute or a Great Dane or something if I was going to get a dog. I support those breeds. I like them. I just like them somewhere other than me. Same as the police. Doesn't seem like it, but I have a little bit of a fear of the police. Nothing terrible, but at the same token, I like them doing their job somewhere else. So it's not really a fear. At the same token, I appreciate it. People who don't like snakes and spiders are probably the same way. They don't want to see a planet without them. At the same token, they want to see them far away from them. Or just period, they don't want to see them. I know they exist all around. At the same token, I'm not seeing them right now, so they don't bother me. It's too bad we can't do that with politicians. Basically, for 4 years, that's what they do to us. 4 to 5 years, depending on your particular electoral district. But between 4 and 5 years, they really don't want to hear from us because they're afraid of us. That's right. Politicians are afraid of their are afraid of their constituents. Who are their constituents? Those who can vote. And that's why you get back to this stupid saying of, if you don't vote, you don't have an opinion. From a politician's standpoint, a more Machiavellian politician could say, oh, you didn't vote for me? Well, your opinion doesn't count because you're not going to vote for me next election. However, this would be extraordinarily dumb of them to say. As a matter of fact, I know a politician who said that, and he was promptly voted out the next election. The fact is, these politicians saying that amongst themselves have made it way out into the general population. And instead of doing what I did as a campaign manager, which was, please come out and vote. We don't care who you vote for, just make sure you come out and vote. Quiet pressure. It has become, if you don't vote, you don't get an opinion. Now it's not quiet pressure, it's very heavy-handed pressure. And it's unwarranted pressure. I said before about your constitutional and charter rights, and just imagine the idea of if somebody doesn't do exactly what you tell them, you erase them from human existence. They are no longer a person to you. Back in the 18th century, they used to do that. That was what were called women and minorities, because they weren't allowed to have an opinion. They weren't allowed to vote. They weren't allowed to do anything. And this stupid motto is basically the same thing. You don't count because you're not a voter. Therefore, you are not human. Talk about fear. Ostracizing someone has always been an effective means of discipline in society. Whether we ostracize them out of our direct society, whether we ostracize them into prison, whatever it is that we kick them out of, it works very well. I know a number of people who, without being cruel, could probably benefit from some time in an insane asylum. At the same token, just the mere mention of those words make a lot of people panic. Anyone who's been there, for example. I was there as a visitor, and I can tell you, it's no picnic. You don't just sit around and have doctors attend to you hand and foot while you go to group therapy and sit and eat whatever the meal is that day. No, 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 no. It is another world, just like jail is another world. In both jail and psychiatric wards, and I imagine there's other examples that I'm not thinking of, you have been cast aside from society, made to live in a different environment with different rules, different everything. You are not part of main society. And this is what, if you don't vote, you have an opinion, is basically doing. Ostracizing you to the limits of society. I encourage you to vote. I encourage you to go in and refuse your ballot if you really feel strongly about the candidates that you have on the table. At the same token, if you don't vote, it's a free choice. It's a free country, or at least on the surface, it's free. And it is better than a couple other countries in the world, better than a lot of other countries in the world. Our system isn't perfect, but right now our whole system is pervaded by fear. Your job gives you fear. Your family gives you fear because you're afraid of losing the little bit that you have. The politicians give you fear. The media gives you fear. Fear, fear, fear. What are you afraid of? Right now, it's probably, if it's not the pandemic that's scaring you, it's the possibility of life after the election. And most of all, the economy probably scares the dickens out of you because it scares the dickens out of everybody. However, I don't call that paranoia because paranoia is a fear of something irrational. I'm sorry, but politics, economics, everything I've mentioned is a rational fear. We don't know what the economy is going to be like. On next year, 2021, Prince Charles is supposed to announce the new version of capitalism that they want to push out. Of course, he's a politician in a slightly different way. He's a hereditary politician as compared to our elected ones. But he's thinking he can stride out onto a balcony, announce his new rules and regulations to capitalism, and we know they're going to promise redistribution of wealth, but we can also promise that it will not benefit anybody listening to this podcast or not listening. It will benefit nobody in particular because the wealth will be redistributed upwards. I don't think Prince Charles has evil intentions in his heart. I don't think he has good intentions in his heart. He is trying to do something worthy. At the same token, how can he enforce his will upon the world? I know one thing. The current president's going to take one look at that document, and if he's still in the office, he's going to laugh it off. Most other countries will probably do the same because despite Prince Charles, he doesn't have the best reputation in the world. One of his sons could probably announce it and get away with it, but it's his last real attempt at glory because we know, barring any really successful life reintegration technologies, he probably won't have a very long rule. I don't know whether that will be because of his health or whether because he'll get sick of it and pass it on, or whether they'll skip him entirely. But this is his Causa Sui project, to reform capitalism, to reform the world around him, and attempt to make it reflect what he thinks is just and proper and true. I haven't been able to see it yet. I've seen some preliminary ideas of what is coming out, but here's someone who's so afraid of the world. This is a royal who has more money and more access to anything that you and I could ever get. And he is afraid. He's afraid of being forgotten. He's afraid that he might never even get a chance to step into the spotlight. He's afraid of the world, the people, and everything he sees. once again, we come back to a fear of the people. Donald Trump is a callous man, I think I can say. He does care about certain things, but as a general rule, he has followed his passion, which is making money. Joe Biden is another person who has followed his own path. Now, I wouldn't say I'd particularly like to have a one-on-one conversation with either of these individuals. At the same token, their life stories are interesting. I might even get around to covering them after the nonsense has died down. Well, I mean the one I haven't already covered. But both men are motivated by fear. Joe Biden is motivated because he wants to become president. Laudable ambition. Everybody should aspire to be the top. Whether it's president, prime minister, CEO, executive, whatever your top is, you should aspire to it. If it's digging ditches, you be the best darn ditch digger you can be. But there's always fear there. Perhaps the best analogy would be athletes. Athletes always have fear in their eyes because they know they're one injury away. They're one draft pick away from being completely replaced. I mean, Google the story of any athlete you particularly feel like, and you'll find within about 6 to 10 years of being out of their profession, even if they're being paid millions of dollars, ridiculous contracts, most of them are broke. And that's what they all fear. They know they have their moment in the sun where it's party all the time, let's go eat 10 cheeseburgers today and work out all day tomorrow. But tomorrow it can all come to an end. Like I said, one injury. The right person steps in at the right time, you're out of a job. And politicians are kind of the same way, especially the ones at the top. They live in fear of the masses because, first of all, most of them have led at least somewhat of a scandalous life. Now, let's put aside the accusations here, but everybody has skeletons in their closet. Most people. There's a few angels, but they tend not to get involved in politics. If I did a deep dive into either Donald Trump or Joe Biden's life or the various presidents, prime ministers around the world, I'll find questionable situations, without a doubt. And the real question is, what is it that keeps them going forward? Why are they not afraid? Because the more power they can get, the further they can distance themselves from the accusations, from whatever it is that lies in their closet that makes them afraid. It's always been a good antidote to fear to mask it with power. And indeed, anybody who's had a neurosis or any sort of mental illness can tell you they were driven by fear. Captains of industry do it, investors do it, everybody is motivated by fear. But in 2020, we can't afford fear anymore. Fear of other races, fear of other religions, fear of other people. Because more than ever, we need to come together. As Yoda famously said in Empire Strikes Back, fear, anger, depression, to the dark side they lead. And this is true. We have a unique experiment in front of us. We have billions of people who have been locked up into restricted, narrow areas. And they've been so for some time. This is a disaster film without the actual disaster. And I'm not trying to downplay the pandemic here, but at the same token, I'm just trying to say where there's no big, magnificent boom event with the meteor coming down, the volcano going off, or the nuclear bombs dropping. There is indeed something out there, but it's a silent killer. It's not a point. If you were going to make a movie, you couldn't say, at this point, this happened, and this triggered all these events. No, because it would look very silly to work it in that way. You would probably start it at some point in the middle where people are working through their various traumas and go from there. But we're all sitting and we're getting told all this fear every day. fear of our politicians, fear of the virus, fear of everything. Again, unity is our response, but we have to unify, as Yoda said, not out of fear and depression, but unify out of hope. When we go out of fear, we give into the dark side, and thus we have riots, thus we have demonstrations that go out of control, thus some idiot picks up a rock and throws it at the police. Then things get out of hand. So, I would like to encourage everybody to start going out, to go to demonstrations. Go do what you're going to do where it's legally allowed to do it, but make sure fear doesn't grip. Make sure anger doesn't grip the crowd. Make sure frustration doesn't grip the crowd. Because that is exactly how fear takes over. And that's how it can win an election. Because it's easy. It's chicken scrap for a politician to point at the riots and say, look at this. This is what we need to control. And use their power to say, we want more law and order. It's easy for shopkeepers to board up their shops because they're afraid of people being afraid. And the people, when they're unified in fear, are grasping for that little bit of power as a salve, as some sort of remedy to the fear that they feel inside. Yeah, throwing a rock at a cop probably feels good for about 2 seconds. After that, it feels like a rather stupid decision. We need to unify, but out of compassion and understanding. Whether you're pro-mask, anti-mask, pro-Democrat, anti-Democrat, pro-conservative, pro-whatever it is, I want you to be pro. And that means not only for, pro something is for something, but also professional. Gone are the days of the 1960s where it's just a bunch of hippies sitting on the side of the road screaming, hell no, we won't go, hell no, we won't go, over and over again. That stuff is 50 or 60 years out of date at this point. You need to be more sensible. Shouting slogans is good because you need to get attention. You need to get recognized, but there's ways that you can do this. Gandhi, for his personal failings as well, was good in that he encouraged non-violent protests. This has been completely lost in the modern day. We don't have non-violent protests any longer. We have extremely violent protests. Even in the civilized world, I'm not going to go to some of the more lawless areas of the world. I'm not going to bring up nations that are fighting for their very existence. I'm just going to take the weird economies. What are weird economies, you might ask? Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Weird. That is the acronym that the scientists call us. Social scientists, psychologists, sociologists, we are weird. That's because we are a small percentage of the world, but we're primarily in the West. We are mostly pretty well educated. We can read and write. Industrialized, yes. I can get Amazon to deliver anything to my door in a very short period of time. Rich, comparatively speaking, we're all pretty rich. And democratic. The educated and the democratic are what I want to concentrate on. Unifying through compassion instead of fear will allow us to affect democracy, because they'll no longer be able to play on our fears. They'll no longer be able to take a crowd and turn it into a weapon. What we are experiencing now is an echo of what went on in the 1930s. There were angry crowds going around and they were calling for a strong leader. They got quite a few, and there were strong leaders. Some of them managed to hold on to power into the 1980s. Others were quickly overthrown and kicked off the world stage. So, going out in fear leaves you vulnerable to the politicians who secretly want nothing more than to distract you. You go away for 4 years, I'll remind you when you come back. And we can't allow that. We have to show them that we have compassion. Instead of going out with a sign depicting the horrors of whatever you're trying to do, go depicting a sign of what we can do to fix things. I've stated my opinion about the environment before here, but at the same token, I fully encourage saving everything that we can. Plastic bottles should go in the recycling. Even though they're not recycling all the plastic bottles, the fact is, plastic is a limited resource. Not only does it come from oil, but it also is really, really ugly on the side of the street. I can go out and I can tell people, ooh, global warming's coming, ooh, and try to scare you, rely on fear. I can have the media repeat it 10,000 times, or I can show you what's being made with what you're recycling. It's a much more positive message, and positive messages are something we are sorely missing in the modern day and age. 2020 has been a strange year. Stressful, anxious, depressing, but I would argue not really very much more so over any other year. The difference is how we, as the human species, are reacting to it. We're afraid, every single one of us, because we don't know where things are going. Well, the Illuminati know exactly where things are going. Their plan is perfect until the people unify. You know why politicians are ultimately afraid of the people unifying? It's because, historically, people, when unified, tend to cut off their heads. I do not advocate the murder of any politician nor treating them wrongly, but at the same token, through uniting in a positive way, we can change their opinion. It's harder than violence. It took Gandhi half of his lifetime to get India's independence. And indeed, it might take 100 years or more for us to reform the system into a way that benefits the people. And the people need it the most. So remember, come together as people with compassion, and let's make this a world worth living in. For those of you with questions or comments on this show, please feel free to email us at silverlightservices@gmail.com. That's silverlightservices@gmail.com. Our new book is out, Frogs. I will have a link to that in the description. And for those of you who have already downloaded it, thank you. For those who don't, you're missing out on a pretty good read. Thank you once again for tuning into the Silverlight Show. Look forward to speaking with you all again soon. And in all honesty, I wish you compassion, peace, and the wisdom to be able to come together and make change happen.